Hello and welcome back to the Silence Voices podcast. I am your host Lyndon and thank you for tuning in to episode 3. This episode is slightly different from the first and second one because this episode is just me and I'm ranting in a way. I will be discussing the content of this episode, but before we get started, I just hope that this episode can help you in a way if you're suffering from any of the mental health issues that are talked or discussed in this episode. Mental health is a very serious topic, and for some people it can be sensitive for them to talk about. So without further ado, let's get started. I think it's safe to say that with the introduction of the 2020 pandemic, with coronavirus and the whole lockdown situation, it has been the cause of why, it has been the reason as to why young teenagers or young adults have been struggling to cope with their mental health. Back in 2020, I remember during the first lockdown, I saw many reports on social media about young adults or teenagers and that they're struggling a whole lot more to cope with their mental health. Ultimately, anyone can develop depression and sadness, but for some people it can be worse. For example, if you're experiencing anxiety. Now, there are many forms of anxiety. For some people, they can experience severe anxiety or crippling anxiety, and in turn, this can result into panic attacks, which are different episodes where the people who suffer from this mental illness, they just burst out, have a panic attack, and start crying, which is very sad and ultimately is heartbreaking. For many of us, we just live our daily lives, but it's different for people who struggle with the mental health, as you don't know exactly what they're going through. The sad truth is that I don't think anyone will truly ever know what someone is going through, because usually when someone is going through something or experiencing mental health, they tend to keep it to themselves. This is very bad because you're bottling up all of the emotions and keeping it to yourself instead of venting and letting it out to someone that you care about and someone that actually cares enough to hear you and help you deal with what you're going through. Back to the topic of anxiety. I believe that anxiety is the result of fear, because when you fear something, you're being very skeptical of the unknown. For example, the unknown can be people's opinions on you, what they think of you, etc. I think as human beings, we have experienced our own fair share of anxiety. As someone who has experienced anxiety myself, I can say that when I get anxious, I tend to overthink stuff. In my opinion, I think overthinking is bad, but at the end of the day, it just can't be helped. It's something that you do out of instinct, and the whole topic of overthinking is just very bad in general, because you're essentially creating situations in your head, and that you're jumping into conclusions. In turn, this creates a lot of stress, as well as the build-up of stress. And when someone is very stressed, they eventually reach the point where they just want to give up. They want to drop everything and just give it a rest. I myself have experienced wanting to give up. There are times where I've wanted to go sleep and just never wake up. But there is always light at the end of the tunnel. I used to be a pessimistic person, but I would look at someone who is happy and just think to myself like, oh, how is that person so happy? How is that person living life so carefree? And then I realized that those who are happy, they just don't care. They don't care at all what people think of them. They don't care what people say about them. Heck, they don't care about living for social media. And this is another problem with our generation, is that with the development of technology, social media has become this big thing where it has taken over our lives. And there are people out there in the world, normal people who are not famous, they are not celebrities, they are not social influencers. These people try so hard to live a life on social media, to create another personality of themselves just to please other people. Like, what is the point of doing that if you're not truly happy within yourself? For the most part, social media is the reason why a lot of people have been suffering anxiety or have developed some form of depression. Ultimately, this is because they are too invested in what others think about them, and in return, they fear what they think of them. Now, back to the topic of coronavirus and the nationwide pandemic or lockdown. I find myself thinking about those people who have suffered a mental health illness even way before this lockdown has been introduced. Like, some people were already having to deal with their own problems as well as their own situations. However, with the introduction of a new virus, like the coronavirus is just a new problem that these people have to deal with. For many people in the world, this virus had just ruined their lives. Like, I'm pretty sure everyone in the entire world is tired of hearing this word because it's just been dragged on for too long. You know, it's been a problem that as a world we have been trying to deal with it for nearly 2 years now. And for the people who are mentally ill, I feel like they are at a heavy disadvantage. It's also very unfair towards them because with the coronavirus, there has been many deaths. And in the end, coronavirus has a very high fatality rate within the elderly. Fortunately enough, children, teenagers, and young adults, we have a higher survival rate than the elderly. This breaks my heart to hear because many families have lost their parents because of this virus. And when you're forced to stay at home in a lockdown, having to mourn a loved one's death, like, it really breaks you down mentally. Fortunately for me, this hasn't happened to me, but I know of some people that have experienced this kind of situation, and I can only sympathize with them because if you're already trying to battle your own demons and deal with your own situations and your mental health, and now that someone you care about, someone that you love and cherish dearly, has passed away because of this new virus, it can only worsen your mental health and just ruin your life in general. When I would read on social media about how people's mental health has gotten worse over the lockdown period, at first I would be judgmental and think like, oh, why is your mental health getting worse in comparison to me, where I was living my life, I was happy and stress-free only because of how much free time I had because of being in a lockdown. I then took into consideration the many reasons as to why I think that many young people and their mental health has gradually gotten worse. For example, like I had already addressed, the death of a loved one. And also because of overwhelming life issues, complications with school and education, having to live with judgmental people, family issues, and financial stability. because with the lockdown, many people were forced to lose their jobs or have been made redundant. Anyways, all these factors that I have stated can be the reason as to why someone's mental health has gotten worse. However, everyone's situation is different, but that doesn't change the fact that we are all in the same boat. Think of mental health as like one big yacht, and everyone else is in that yacht, all trying to solve or deal with their own mental health issues. They are battling their own problems, but we are all in the same situation. Thank you guys for tuning in to the last episode of the Silenced Voices podcast. However, I hope that this last episode has spoken to you and that my words have helped you in some way. If you are currently experiencing any form of mental illness, I just want you to know that you are not alone, that I myself have experienced some dark times and that there is always light at the end of the tunnel. But most importantly, you should not care about what anyone has to think of you. You should not care about their opinions. And don't live a life trying to please someone else. I have been your host, Lyndon, and I am signing out.